Welcome back, Virtual Circuit Riders. We're going to look at some other themes in the post-Civil War period. One of the Northern Church's more important initiatives, beginning right after the Emancipation Proclamation of January of 1863, was to put together a Freedmen's Aid Society. The Freedmen's Aid and Southern Education Society was put together soon after the Civil War in August of 1866, and its intention was to provide high school, secondary, and colleges for the freed slaves during Reconstruction. And that's what they did, the Freedmen's Aid Society. We want to look here at some of the important historic black colleges that the Freedmen's Aid Society created. If you look at this map from 1921, using some antiquarian language here, you can see some of the great Southern historic black colleges were founded by the Freedmen's. Another post-Civil War initiative that was very important, issuing from the Southern Church, was the formation of the CME, originally called the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church. The newly freedmen who were members of the Methodist Episcopal Church South after the Civil War and their freedom petitioned the Southern Methodist Church for their independence, which was granted in 1870. Two bishops, Robert Payne and Holland McTeer, this man here, were the bishops that attended the formation of the CME and ordained its first independent preachers and consecrated its first bishops. Holland McTeer goes on to become the founder of Vanderbilt University, which we looked at in an earlier piece. Holland McTeer and Robert Payne consecrated this man, William Henry Miles, as the first bishop of the CME in Jackson, Tennessee. The Southern Church gave financial assistance to the CME. Later, these three men were consecrated bishops and served well into the 20th century. The CME changed its name in the 1950s from the Colored Methodist Church to the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, and always had a very progressive, reconciling view of relations with Southern Methodism. The CME has close to a million members, 800,000 in 2006, with missions in Africa, Haiti, and Jamaica. One of their great colleges, Payne College in Augusta, Georgia, was a joint founding institution by the Southern Methodist Church and the CME. CME, when you look at the CME and its work, you can also see post-Civil War Southern Methodism's partnership with African Americans in some positive ways as well. It was not all the Northern Church that was involved in creating institutions of higher education. The CME, in partnership with the Southern Church, created institutions, the Phillips School of Theology in Jackson, Tennessee, Lane College, also in Jackson, Tennessee. You can see missions to the north from the CME began. Payne College, Phillips School of Theology, a part of the Atlanta University and the ITC work with Gammon, was founded in 1959 by the CME. Miles College in Alabama, Texas College. And you can see that a number of mission initiatives occurred throughout the Midwest. William Henry Miles in mission to Missouri and Kansas, Kentucky. And by 1920, you can see there were 267,000 members. Many of these had come from the Southern Methodist work, but many converts were drained away to the AME and the AME Zion when they came south during and after the Civil War. So a lot of this work was just due to the diligence of the work of the CME itself. And so we look at the work, the strength of the CME is in the southern states, but they have a wider sweep thanks to the work of its bishops. In the post-Civil War America, particularly the Northern Church, which was not debilitated by the Civil War economically, the Northern churches grew in economic power and also in geographic sweep through expansion westward. We've already talked about the power of Bishop Matthew Simpson, who solidified Northern Methodism's center role within American political and cultural life through his friendship and eulogy of Abraham Lincoln. The MEC in the northern cities in the post-Civil War era, because of Simpson's ability to win friends among the rich and influential industrialists of the North, he was able to fundraise and build Western expansion through the Church Extension Society. The Northern Church, the MEC, in 1864, created the Church Extension Society, which was led by C.C. McCabe, who was a Civil War chaplain, a story much like John McCain. In fact, he kind of looks a little bit like John McCain. He was a prisoner of war, was a chaplain during the Civil War, and wrote a book, The Brighter Side of Life, in prison, in Libby Prison, and it was a bestseller, and he was able to raise money for the Church Extension Society, which led the Northern Church's Western expansion into the Western states that were coming into being in the late 19th century, the post-Civil War era. So C.C. McCabe goes on to become bishop and first chancellor and founder of American University in Washington, D.C. But C.C. McCabe and the Church Extension Society led in Western expansion. Bishop Matthew Simpson believed and wrote that God had providentially put gold in the ground in the West, and that the Methodists needed to send missionaries through the Church Extension Society out west, not only to found churches, but to extract the gold. And so he had a sort of a manifest destiny theology that Methodism was growing with the economic growth of the country, and he was able to fundraise for not only northern expansion, but the MEC South expanded and created 10 annual conferences in the South. And of course, this inflamed the MEC South, its feelings. And but the Freedmen's Aid Society was able to build colleges, both in the North and the South. And Simpson was able to place Methodism among the elite of the Northern industrial class. He edited a Encyclopedia of Methodism in the late 19th century that really was just a who's who of Northern industrial wealthy Methodists. So he was able to harness the economic growth of the post-Civil War North to mission work, and also founded urban work to handle the massive immigration coming into the northern cities. And so Matthew Simpson, a complicated figure in many ways, also was a leading visionary, harnessing economic growth of the North with missionary expansion both around the world and trying to provide new opportunities of learning for the newly freed persons of the South. He was always very abolitionist and anti-slavery, and so was very progressive in terms of his views on race and the need for educating the new freed African Americans of the South. The westward expansion that he was able to support economically is pictured here. Also in my historical atlas, there's state by state CD-ROM, Google Earth treatment of this. But as you can see, really it was the west coast, the left coast as it were, that was the earliest arena of Methodist work, going to 1834. Jason Lee, we'll talk about him when we look at Native American missionary work in Oregon. But really, you can see 1834 as one of the first works of the Mission Society. And so there was an overlapping work of the Mission Society, of the Northern Church and the Southern Church, and then the Church Extension Societies, which also functioned to raise money and do church plants. The Northern and Southern branches had Church Extension Societies. So you had a lot of competition in the Western expansion, beginning with missionary work in the 1830s, going forward after an initial unsuccessful work. 1840s, the Oregon area, Willamette University today in Oregon, one of the earliest, probably the earliest higher education facility in the West was Methodist. You can see the Southern Church, even before the Civil War, was active along the Pacific Coast, the Columbia Conference. San Francisco, even though they have a football team called the 49ers, even by 1847, the Northern Church had work in San Francisco, attempting to work with the miners and the Western demographic shift. 1850, San Francisco has a Southern Methodist work by Jesse Boring, and Los Angeles itself, as early as 1853, had work in the saloons there, turning saloons into churches. Adam Bland from the Southern Church. The Southern Church proved they were neither boring nor bland in their work in San Francisco and in LA. They would take saloons often and turn them into churches. So, it's a bad pun. Boring and bland, the Southern Church, and indeed the Methodist Episcopal Church of the North on the West Coast by the 1850s. You can see that the Midwestern states were filled in by Methodist work from the 1850s, moving from Kansas and Nebraska. Really, the opening for work in the Midwest was the Native American mission work of both the North and the South from 1830 after the Trail of Tears. We'll look at the Native American mission work in a separate segment, but you can see Native American work provided the first opening missionary work in the Oklahoma Territory, which originally was an Indian territory, as they called it, and only later evolved into Caucasian work as the Western expansion continued. And you can see that as the railroads began to move west and fill in and become transcontinental, the Methodist Episcopal Church could go forward, but it's not until the 1870s, 1860s and 1870s that Montana becomes strongly Methodist. We'll look at the work that provided these Western pieces.